Hello and welcome to another short video from Posted in the Past. This is the third in a series which tells the story of the Mayflower. When I was putting together the postcards for second delivery, which was published this year, I wanted to include a short selection of postcards which would illustrate the story of the Mayflower. So out of almost 100 postcards, a dozen or so actually tell the story of the Mayflower. And in this last video, I'm just going to talk about what happened next. As well as using the postcards because of the illustrations, I've also researched the families who received the cards, and I've used the same resources as I would for any other project. So genealogy resources, census returns, marriage registers, etc. If you have any research into American relatives in your tree, don't be put off by the fact that they are in America. I found in particular the death certificates were very useful because they have the place of birth of the person who's died and also the details of their parents, including the mother's maiden name. So they're very, very useful in confirming that you have the correct person. Anyway, this first postcard is of Duxbury, which is about 10 miles away from Plymouth. Because some of the passengers on the Mayflower weren't there for religious reasons, they perhaps moved away out of the area and to Duxbury, where they were able to create their own homes. This particular postcard was sent to a widow who was in her 80s at the time, and she lived in Duxbury. She was the daughter of an Italian sailor who became a naturalised American citizen and would eventually be buried in the Mayflower Cemetery. The image on the postcard is captioned to be the first department store in America in Duxbury itself. Now, I don't know how accurate that claim is, but in the 1920s, the shop actually burnt down, and it was reported that it was heated and lit using kerosene, and you see from the image it was made from wood, so perhaps not surprisingly it burnt down. The town of Duxbury is now very built up, but there is a marker along the road where the store was, commemorating it as being the first department store in America. Now, the postcards that I researched for this section followed the story mainly of Priscilla Mullins, who'd sailed on the Mayflower with her parents and brother, and her parents and brother actually didn't survive the first year, but she married John Alden, who wasn't a pilgrim as such. He was there as a carpenter, and they moved to Duxbury and had a very large family. Not all of their children survived infancy, but a large number did, and they actually had a large dynasty of families who can trace their ancestry back to the Mayflower from John and Priscilla. One of their children was Betty Alden, and this is her house in Rhode Island. Now, she was given the accolade in the 19th century of being the first daughter of the Mayflower. Now, she was actually born 3 or 4 years after the Mayflower arrived in America, so it's unlikely that she was the first daughter, the first girl that was born. But of course, she may well have been the first to survive infancy because the mortality rate would have been so high. She married William Peabody, and like her parents, she also had a large family. And so you can see how this dynasty spread out and why so many people can claim their right to be descended from John and Priscilla, because Betty wasn't the only child that had a large family. I can well imagine that if you're doing the pilgrim tour in this part of America, that visiting Betty Alden's house, the location of it would have been something of a highlight for you. Of course, one of the questions about the Mayflower is what actually happened to the ship itself, and there are several sort of stories about what happened to it. It actually returned to England eventually and sailed again to America, and then worked along the coast of England before it was broken up. It is said by some that some of the timbers from the Mayflower were used to construct this barn, which is the Mayflower barn in Buckinghamshire. It's a large building, which you probably don't get from looking at the image. Somebody at one of my talks recently told me that they live not far from the barn in Buckinghamshire, and it's used for functions. And he said it is quite a large building. So could the beams or some of the beams used in this barn actually be from the Mayflower? Well, the dating techniques that we have available to us today confirm that some of the beams do date from the correct time of the Mayflower's construction. But of course that doesn't prove that they are actually from the Mayflower. And of course you have to ask yourself, why would the beams from this ship actually have been taken to Buckinghamshire? At the time the Mayflower ceased work and was broken up, there was no historical importance attached to the name of the ship. It wasn't the first ship to take passengers to America. It didn't take the first settlers to America. It was only later, much later, that the Mayflower and the Pilgrims actually became such an important and well-known story on both sides of the Atlantic. And certainly that didn't happen around the time that the barn was actually built. So we don't know. Perhaps it's nice to think that some of the Mayflower wood does survive to this day, but I think it's unlikely. The postcard was sent in the 1920s, so it's actually one of the newer cards that I've researched. I didn't find any postcards of the barn around the normal era that I would look for, which would be the first 10 or so years of the 20th century. So presumably this is the first time that the image of the barn was used on a postcard. I did find several of this image, but I chose the card because I could trace the young girl who received it. She was Marigold, and she was the daughter of a lecturer. And because I researched her as a later subject, there wasn't quite so much available to me. You know, I would be able to find her in 1939 in the register, which I did. But when I'm researching people from a postcard sent earlier, there's more resources and I can tell a more detailed story about her. But with this postcard, there's a surprising thing that I did find, which was perfect, really, because I used this postcard in my book as the final one in the Mayflower Connection, which is the section of the book about the Mayflower. And I found that Marigold was returning to England on board a ship with her father. Now, whether or not this was for a holiday or because perhaps her father had been giving a lecture abroad, I don't know the reason for it. But when they arrived back in England, the ship docked at Plymouth. Now that was wonderful for me because it sort of brought the story of the Mayflower full circle, and was the perfect card. So although it's a more recent postcard than I would normally research, I did feel that actually it was the right card for me to actually research. And of course, with all of the postcards, until I've actually done the research, I never know where I'm going to be taken. I had no idea that Marigold, when she was a little bit older, would go on a ship and return to Plymouth. So you just never know where the postcards will take you. Anyway, that's the end of this video. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook as posted in the past. And every day I share an image of a postcard from either of my two books, or perhaps it's a postcard that I haven't yet researched. I hope you've enjoyed this video. There are others that you can look at. And as I say, this is the third and last one that tells the story of the Mayflower. Thank you.